Homelessness in America has surged into a sweeping national emergency, exposing the deep cracks in a society under strain. It's a chilling sign of systemic collapse. From Los Angeles to New York City, sidewalks are packed with encampments, parents are raising children out of cars, and cities that once symbolized opportunity now look more like disaster areas. Tonight alone, more than 650,000 people across the country have no place to call home, the highest figure ever documented, while tens of millions more hover just one missed paycheck away from total financial ruin. Soaring housing costs, disappearing jobs, and years of government paralysis have transformed poverty from a temporary hardship into a long-term reality for many. This crisis goes far beyond numbers on a balance sheet. It's not only an economic breakdown, but a profound moral failure as well. What follows is a look at the 10 U.S. states unraveling the fastest under the growing pressure of poverty and homelessness. Number 10. New York. Once held up as the ultimate emblem of wealth, ambition, and possibility, New York is now quietly buckling under the pressure of extreme inequality. Behind Manhattan's glittering billion-dollar skyline sits a growing humanitarian crisis that's impossible to ignore. As of 2024, more than 81 out of every 10,000 residents are officially homeless, the highest rate anywhere in the country. Each night, over 180,000 men, women, and children sleep in shelters, on subway trains, or out on the sidewalks. Within New York City alone, the shelter population has exploded, jumping 47% since 2022. Keeping that system from completely collapsing now costs taxpayers a staggering $4.3 billion every single year. At the same time, the median rent in Manhattan has climbed past $5,200 a month, while service workers earn a median income of roughly $38,000 annually. The numbers simply don't work. For tens of thousands of residents, the idea of securing a stable apartment has vanished. Holding down a full-time job no longer guarantees a place to live. Entire families are being housed in hotel rooms paid for with emergency city funds, a temporary solution that drains hundreds of millions of dollars every quarter. Layer on top of that the arrival of nearly 130,000 migrants and asylum seekers since 2023, and a system that was already stretched thin has tipped into outright disaster. Shelters are out of beds. Food pantries are overwhelmed. Hospitals in the Bronx and Brooklyn report record spikes in mental health crises and preventable illnesses directly linked to homelessness. The struggle isn't confined to the city either. Upstate areas like Rochester and Buffalo are grappling with economic decline of their own, with poverty rates in some counties climbing past 19%, well above the national average. The collapse of manufacturing, the grip of opioid addiction, and relentless inflation have stripped vitality from communities that once flourished. Today, more than 1.7 million New Yorkers live below the poverty line, scraping by on less than $15,000 a year. Meanwhile, billion-dollar developers continue erecting luxury towers that remain half-empty, monuments to the widening gap between extreme wealth and desperation. It's a tale of two New Yorks, one wrapped in gold and glass, the other bedding down in subway tunnels. The city that once embodied the American dream now stands at the epicenter of the nation's urban poverty crisis. And if current projections prove accurate, with housing costs expected to rise another 12% by 2026, New York could soon face a wave of homelessness not seen since the Great Depression. Number 9. California. California, now the world's fifth largest economy, is buckling under the very wealth that once made it legendary. Beneath the polished image of luxury Teslas, tech campuses, and billion-dollar startups sits a massive human tragedy. As of 2024, more than 187,000 Californians are homeless, over 30% of the entire homeless population in the United States. In Los Angeles alone, nearly 75,000 people are living on sidewalks, beaches, and beneath freeway overpasses. San Francisco pours more than $1.3 billion a year into homelessness programs, yet sprawling encampments still stretch for miles, resembling scenes from a post-apocalyptic landscape. At the same time, the median home price has surged past $843,000, while the median household income hovers around $84,000. The gap is impossible to ignore. By any reasonable math, even middle-class families are being pushed out. Nearly 53% of renters now spend more than a third of their income just to keep a roof over their heads. On top of that, the price of everyday essentials, milk, gas, electricity, basic utilities, has jumped more than 28% since 2020. In San Diego, the average one-bedroom apartment rents for about $2,800 a month, forcing working families to live in RVs, cars, or tents simply to survive. When adjusted for the state's brutal cost of living, California's poverty rate is the highest in the nation at 13.2%, according to census data. More than 5 million residents live below the poverty line, even as the state collects record tax revenues. Many of those struggling aren't unemployed. They're teachers, janitors, delivery drivers, and service workers who can no longer afford to live anywhere near their jobs. The crisis deepens with a growing mental health emergency. Over one-third of the unsheltered population suffers from severe mental illness or addiction, overwhelming hospitals and law enforcement alike. In San Jose, cleanup crews haul away hundreds of tons of trash every single week from encampments lining highways and creek beds. Fires, disease outbreaks, and overdoses have become disturbingly routine. Financially, the strain is showing. California's budget deficit ballooned to $45 billion in 2025, with emergency housing and social services draining billions more. Even Silicon Valley, once the crown jewel of innovation, now looks dystopian, where luxury condos loom over tents tucked along riverbanks. Once celebrated as the ultimate land of opportunity, California is rapidly becoming a symbol of America's social unraveling. It's a place where billionaires retreat into gated enclaves while veterans sleep beside electric car charging stations. If current trends continue, the state could surpass 200,000 homeless residents by 2026, ushering in a humanitarian crisis on a scale the nation has never seen before. Number 8. Oklahoma. Oklahoma rarely dominates national news cycles, but its decline is unfolding quietly and relentlessly beneath the surface. The state's poverty rate sits at 14.5%, which translates to more than 600,000 people trying to survive on less than $15,000 a year. In rural counties like McCurtain and Choctaw, poverty levels climb past 22%, rivaling conditions found in some of the poorest areas of the Deep South. Rising rents have ripped through low-income communities with little warning. The average cost of a modest two-bedroom apartment has climbed to around $1,500 a month, while wages in many service sector jobs remain stuck at roughly $13 an hour. As a result, more than 37% of renters are now spending over half their income just to stay housed. Unsurprisingly, homelessness has surged statewide, increasing by 19% since 2021. In cities like Oklahoma City and Tulsa, tent encampments are spreading along riverbanks, beneath overpasses, and across empty lots. Beyond the cities, a quieter crisis is unfolding. Rural homelessness, often invisible in official statistics, is growing fast. Families are sleeping in cars, rotating through motels, or living in deteriorating trailers that never make it into formal counts. In 2024 alone, more than 21,000 children in Oklahoma's public schools were labeled housing unstable, a number that continues to rise. Food insecurity has also reached alarming levels, with 1 in 7 residents struggling to get enough to eat. Local food banks report record demand as more families seek help just to make it through the month. Meanwhile, the collapse of the healthcare system is making matters worse. Nearly 12% of Oklahomans remain uninsured, one of the highest rates in the country. And hospital closures in small towns have left tens of thousands without access to basic medical care. Education offers little relief. The state spends barely $8,000 per student each year, placing Oklahoma near the bottom nationally and locking many children into the same cycle of poverty their parents face. At the same time, layoffs in the oil and gas industry are rippling through local economies, pushing incomes even lower. Inflation and prolonged drought have driven grocery prices up 26% since 2020, forcing working families to make impossible choices between rent, fuel, and food. Oklahoma's natural beauty masks a deep and growing despair. Across the plains, abandoned farms, shuttered schools, and foreclosed homes stand as quiet reminders of communities in decline. If current trends continue and no meaningful changes are made, the state could see homelessness rise by as much as 30% by 2025. pushing thousands more people into the margins of a forgotten America. It's a collapse that rarely makes headlines, but one with an undeniable and devastating human cost. Number 7. Arkansas. Arkansas, long known as the natural state, is quietly being pulled under by deepening poverty. Beneath its rolling hills, green forests, and small-town charm lies one of the most serious economic breakdowns in the southern United States. The state's poverty rate hovers around 15.3%, meaning nearly 500,000 residents are living below the federal poverty threshold of about $15,000 a year. In cities like Pine Bluff and West Memphis, that figure climbs past 25%, where abandoned homes now outnumber available jobs. The median household income in Arkansas barely reaches $55,000, far below the national average of roughly $77,000, and inflation has eaten away about 12% of real wages since 2020. Basic living costs have surged at the same time. Grocery prices are up 27%, while electricity bills have jumped by as much as 40%. For many families, staying afloat now means relying on payday loans, skipping doctor visits, and delaying care they simply can't afford. Homelessness across the state has climbed nearly 18% since 2021. While official counts list around 2,800 unhoused residents, experts estimate the real number is likely 2 or even 3 times higher. Many people remain hidden, sleeping in wooded areas, cars, or rundown motels. In Little Rock, shelters are overflowing, forcing churches to convert basements into makeshift sleeping quarters. In rural counties, entire families live in aging trailers without reliable heat, depending on local charities for food, blankets, and basic necessities. Education and healthcare are unraveling in tandem. Arkansas ranks near the bottom nationally in literacy rates and child well-being, with 1 in 4 children growing up in poverty. At the same time, healthcare access is shrinking fast. Since 2018, 6 rural hospitals have closed, leaving residents in some areas to drive hours for emergency or routine treatment. Medical debt now averages more than $1,400 per person, one of the highest levels in the country. Despite these realities, state leaders continue to promote a narrative of economic revival. In practice, much of that growth is concentrated around Walmart's headquarters in Bentonville, not in the communities where workers stock shelves for about $13 an hour. The wealth gap continues to widen as rural infrastructure crumbles, roads riddled with potholes, schools starved of funding, and drug addiction spreading through the Ozarks. If current trends hold, Arkansas's poverty rate could climb beyond 16% by 2026, pushing tens of thousands more residents into hardship. What was once marketed as a land of opportunity has become a warning sign, a place defined by forgotten workers, quiet suffering, and an unfolding humanitarian crisis that rarely earns attention in Washington. Number 6. Alabama. Alabama, often praised for its southern hospitality and deep-rooted history, is now buckling under the growing burden of poverty and homelessness. With a poverty rate hovering near 15%, nearly 750,000 residents are living below the federal poverty line. In the Black Belt region, one of the poorest areas in the entire country, the situation is even more severe, with poverty levels climbing past 30% and entire counties scraping by on median incomes under $30,000 a year. The economic damage runs deep and shows up in everyday life. In Birmingham, the median rent has risen above $1,250 a month, while many service workers earn an average of just $12.75 an hour. Even working full-time, that adds up to less than $26,000 annually, leaving almost nothing after rent, food, and basic expenses. In 2024 alone, utility costs jumped by 35%, gas prices rose 18%, and grocery bills surged nearly 25%. As a result, food insecurity now affects 1 out of every 6 households across the state. Homelessness, once largely hidden from view, is rapidly escalating. Official counts list more than 3,500 unhoused Alabamians, but advocacy groups believe the true number is closer to 10,000 when factoring in people sleeping in cars, abandoned buildings, and improvised shelters. Cities like Mobile and Huntsville are witnessing record-sized encampments popping up near interstate exits and beneath bridges. Cash-strapped local governments often respond by clearing camps without providing alternative housing, a cycle of displacement that fixes nothing and deepens the harm. The collapse of healthcare access only intensifies the crisis. Alabama has repeatedly refused to expand Medicaid, leaving more than 300,000 adults without health insurance. Rural hospitals are shutting down at an alarming rate, with at least 7 closures over the past decade. The consequences are stark. Infant mortality rates rank among the worst in the nation, and Alabama sits near the bottom, 47th overall, in life expectancy. Education tells a similar story of decline. Schools are overcrowded, textbooks are outdated, and teachers are underpaid. Nearly 20% of students graduate high school without basic literacy skills, locking another generation into long-term poverty. What remains is a grim contradiction. Large corporations continue to receive generous tax incentives, while everyday residents wait desperately for housing vouchers that may never come. As the wealthiest 10% prosper, millions of others struggle simply to keep the lights on. If current trends continue, Alabama could see homelessness rise by as much as 25% by 2026, signaling a full-scale humanitarian breakdown. The heart of Dixie has become a place of quiet despair, a state where faith alone can't fill empty stomachs, and where the promise of the American dream is slipping away into hunger, debt, and deepening hopelessness. Number 5. Kentucky. Kentucky, famous for bourbon, horse racing, and rolling bluegrass hills, is now facing a slow collapse hidden behind Southern manners and quiet resilience. The state's poverty rate hovers around 15.9%, leaving nearly 700,000 residents trapped below the poverty line. In the Appalachian counties of eastern Kentucky, conditions are far worse, with poverty climbing to 25% or higher. There, abandoned coal mines and widespread opioid addiction have become part of everyday life. The economic fallout from coal's collapse is impossible to ignore. An industry that once employed roughly 120,000 workers in the 1980s now supports fewer than 20,000, hollowing out entire towns that depended on those jobs. Median household income across the state sits at about $57,000, nearly $20,000 below the national average, and inflation has stripped away much of what little buying power families once had. Housing costs continue to rise as wages stagnate. Since 2020, rent for even a basic apartment in Louisville has jumped 34%, reaching an average of $1,250 a month. Meanwhile, many Kentuckians earn less than $14 an hour. Grocery prices and utility bills have climbed faster than paychecks, with energy costs alone rising by as much as 40% in large parts of the state. Homelessness is growing rapidly, up 22% since 2021. Official counts list just over 5,000 unhoused residents, but community organizations believe the real number is closer to 12,000 when accounting for families living in motels, cars, or improvised RV parks. Food insecurity has also hit emergency levels. Nearly 16% of households now rely on food banks, and some counties are reporting shortages in school lunch programs. The education system is deteriorating alongside the economy. Kentucky ranks among the bottom 10 states for public school funding, spending roughly $10,400 per student compared to the national average of $14,300. The consequences are clear. Poor literacy rates, lower graduation numbers, and generational poverty that keeps families locked in hardship. Healthcare offers little relief. Nearly 9% of Kentuckians remain uninsured, and rural hospitals are disappearing fast. Since 2015, 11 facilities have shut their doors, leaving vast areas without nearby medical care. At the same time, drug overdoses have surged 40% since the pandemic, with fentanyl now the leading cause of death for adults under 40. Kentucky's decline isn't loud or sudden. It's quiet, slow, and relentless. Empty factories line the highways. Small towns are filled with for sale signs, and schools plead for basic supplies. Here, the American dream has shifted from prosperity to mere survival. Without major structural changes, Kentucky's poverty crisis could evolve into a full-scale humanitarian breakdown by 2026, reshaping the state into a stark symbol of America's forgotten working class. Number 4. West Virginia. West Virginia, once the driving force behind America's coal-powered economy, now sits in deep economic distress. With a poverty rate approaching 17%, more than 300,000 residents are living below the poverty line. In southern Appalachian counties like McDowell and Logan, the situation is far more severe. where poverty exceeds 30%. These aren't abstract statistics. They represent communities drained of opportunity, battered by addiction, and left behind by decades of job loss. Household incomes tell the same story. The median income in West Virginia is just $53,000, making it the third lowest in the nation. At the same time, average rent has climbed to about $1,500 a month, an impossible burden for residents relying on Social Security, disability benefits, or part-time work. In 2024, grocery prices surged by 25%, while electricity costs jumped 30%, forcing many families into impossible choices between heating their homes and putting food on the table. The collapse of coal gutted the state's economy. Over the past 20 years, more than 40,000 mining jobs have vanished. In the vacuum left behind, the opioid epidemic took hold, tearing apart families and entire towns. Today, West Virginia records the highest overdose death rate in the United States, about 90 deaths per 100,000 people, nearly double the national average. Healthcare systems are buckling under the strain, with hospitals closing and mental health services overwhelmed. Homelessness has been quietly climbing as well, rising roughly 15% since 2020. More than 2,200 West Virginians are now without stable housing, many of them elderly or disabled. In rural areas, homelessness often remains hidden, with people sleeping in cars, old trailers, or deep in wooded areas, out of sight but at constant risk. Food insecurity affects 1 in 5 households, and local charities warn that donations are shrinking just as demand continues to grow. Education reflects the broader decay. Chronic teacher shortages plague the state, and more than 20% of children are growing up in deep poverty. With spending at just over $11,000 per student, West Virginia ranks near the bottom nationally. Young people are voting with their feet. The state lost 3% of its population over the past decade, one of the steepest declines in the country. Despite billions of dollars in federal aid, progress remains painfully slow. Roads crumble, water systems fail, and once bustling main streets have become ghost towns. Today, the Mountain State stands as a stark symbol of economic abandonment in America, a place where hope feels increasingly scarce and poverty has settled in as a permanent condition. Without bold reforms or new industries to replace what was lost, West Virginia risks not just continued decline, but fading entirely from the map of American prosperity. Number 3. Mississippi. Mississippi has become the painful center of America's poverty emergency. With a poverty rate of roughly 19.3%, it remains the poorest state in the nation. That translates to nearly 600,000 people trying to survive on less than $15,000 a year. In entire counties like Holmes, Issaquena, and Humphreys, poverty levels climb beyond 30%. Places where the promise of the American dream never truly existed. Income levels reflect the depth of the crisis. Mississippi's median household income sits at just $52,000, far below the national average of about $77,000. At the same time, inflation has slammed residents from every direction. Grocery prices have risen 29% since 2020. Electricity costs are up 32%, and rents in cities like Jackson and Gulfport now exceed $1,200 a month, an impossible figure for many families. Homelessness is growing quietly but relentlessly. More than 4,000 Mississippians are officially homeless, while thousands more are doubled up with relatives or sleeping in cars. Shelters are overwhelmed, and in many rural counties they don't exist at all. Schools report more than 16,000 children without stable housing. Across Delta towns, families live in crumbling homes plagued by leaking roofs and toxic black mold, dangerous conditions often mislabeled as affordable housing. Healthcare is in free fall. Mississippi has one of the lowest life expectancies in the country, averaging just 71 years, and more than 14% of residents remain uninsured. Since 2010, 10 rural hospitals have closed, forcing patients to drive hours for even basic care. Infant mortality remains the worst in the nation, at 8.8 deaths per 1,000 births, double the rate seen in some northern states. Chronic underfunding only deepens the damage. Public schools receive less money per student than nearly anywhere else in the U.S., reinforcing cycles of poverty that pass from one generation to the next. Infrastructure is failing too. In Jackson, boil water notices have become routine, and entire neighborhoods regularly go days without safe drinking water. Despite all this, political leaders often describe the situation as progress. Federal aid and development grants disappear into layers of bureaucracy, while ordinary residents slide further into debt and desperation. If current trends continue, Mississippi's poverty rate could surpass 20% by 2026, a grim threshold no state should ever cross. The Magnolia State has become a landscape of broken promises, a stark reminder that when poverty is ignored for too long, it stops being a crisis and becomes a permanent wound on the nation's conscience. Number 2. New Mexico. From afar, New Mexico looks almost unreal. Red rock canyons, endless desert skies, and ancient Pueblo history woven into the landscape. But beneath that beauty is a crisis quietly tearing the state apart. With a poverty rate around 18.5%, New Mexico ranks among the poorest states in the country. More than 390,000 residents live below the poverty line, and countless others sit just above it, one missed paycheck away from financial collapse. In 2024, the state's median household income reached only $56,000, while average rent in Albuquerque climbed to about $1,400 a month, an increase of 31% since 2020. At the same time, the cost of living has surged across the board. Food prices are up 26%, gas costs have risen 19%, and energy bills in rural areas have jumped as much as 40%. The impact on families is severe. More than 1 in 5 children experience hunger each month, placing New Mexico among the worst states in the nation for child food insecurity. Homelessness has grown rapidly, increasing 23% since 2021. More than 4,300 people are now living on the streets or in vehicles. In Albuquerque, encampments stretch for miles, while in rural counties like McKinley and San Juan, the crisis remains largely hidden. Families sleep in abandoned trailers. Navajo elders live without electricity or running water, often overlooked in official counts. The healthcare system is compounding the damage. Nearly 11% of residents lack health insurance, and hospitals in smaller towns are critically understaffed. Mental health services are vanishing, even as need continues to rise. New Mexico ranks 48th nationally for access to medical care, and overdose deaths have surged 35% since 2020. Education tells an equally troubling story. The state spends roughly $10,700 per student, and academic performance remains among the lowest in the country. In some districts, dropout rates have climbed to 20%, accelerating a cycle of generational poverty. With few job opportunities outside tourism and government, young people are leaving in droves, turning once lively communities into near ghost towns. Even tourism, long considered an economic lifeline, is faltering. The combined blow of the pandemic and inflation wiped out small businesses across Santa Fe and Taos, leaving fewer opportunities behind. Today, poverty, addiction, and housing insecurity increasingly define what was once called the land of enchantment. New Mexico isn't just struggling, it's being forgotten. If current trends continue, analysts warn the poverty rate could reach 20% by 2026, with homelessness doubling in major cities. What was once a symbol of cultural richness is now on the front lines of economic decay, where hope evaporates almost as quickly as rain in the desert. Number 1. Louisiana. Louisiana is unraveling faster than any other state in modern America. With an official poverty rate of 18.9%, more than 880,000 residents are living in deep poverty, many surviving on less than $12,000 a year. The state now ranks at the top nationally for inequality, child poverty, and vulnerability to natural disasters. For tens of thousands of people, survival isn't something measured month to month. It's a daily struggle. The numbers paint a bleak picture. Median household income sits at just $54,000, while the overall cost of living has jumped 25% since 2020. In New Orleans, average rent has climbed to roughly $1,500 a month, a staggering 41% increase in just 4 years. In Baton Rouge, grocery prices are up 28%, and utility bills consume nearly $300 a month for many low-income households. Nearly 1 in 3 children in Louisiana now grows up in poverty. Homelessness has accelerated at an alarming pace, rising 30% since 2021. More than 9,000 Louisianans are currently unhoused. In the aftermath of hurricanes and floods, thousands of families are still living in FEMA trailers years later, largely forgotten by both state and federal authorities. In parishes like Orleans, Jefferson, and Caddo, tent encampments stretch along levees and beneath bridges, resembling modern refugee camps inside the borders of the United States. Healthcare is collapsing under the strain. Louisiana ranks 49th in overall health outcomes, with nearly 15% of residents lacking health insurance and hospitals pushed beyond capacity. Life expectancy averages just 73 years, almost a decade shorter than in states like California or Massachusetts. At the same time, the opioid crisis has intensified, with overdose deaths climbing 45% since 2020. Education offers little relief. Louisiana ranks near the bottom nationally in reading and math performance and spends only about $11,000 per student. Nearly 19% of young adults are neither working nor enrolled in school, leaving an entire generation adrift. Rural communities are emptying out, while urban centers struggle with rising crime, addiction, and economic instability. The state's economy remains dangerously fragile, heavily dependent on oil, tourism, and low-wage labor. When hurricanes hit, everything grinds to a halt. Billions of dollars are lost, and recovery funds often vanish into layers of bureaucracy. Even New Orleans, once a cultural crown jewel, is now grappling with skyrocketing rents, job insecurity, and homelessness at crisis levels. By 2026, Louisiana's poverty rate could surpass 20%, marking an official economic emergency. The state that gave America jazz, resilience, and soul is now drowning, not in floodwaters but in neglect. The Pelican State has become a warning to the nation. When inequality is allowed to fester, collapse doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in slowly, relentlessly, and heartbreakingly quiet.